I'm gonna start recording also, just to make sure I get everything. Um, so I'll start it on a count. 3, 2, 1, and hello everyone tuning in. Welcome to another episode of the podcast here. There's a lot to talk about this episode. We have a lot of rumblings for Diablo 2. So I'm going to be covering that. I'm going to talk about Diablo 4 a little bit and just quickly touch on the Path of Exile League. So I'm going to get the short topics out of the way. Path of Exile has the new league, Echoes of the Atlas. It's super fun. There's been a lot of good changes to the end game, and they actually broke a record for the number of concurrent players that they had playing the game, which is excellent for them. And honestly, this seems like one of the smoothest launches they've ever had for a league, and the only thing complicating things was the number of people. And that's something you really want, honestly. This is the first league they have under their new development principles, which are centered around scoping things out in their league and also giving themselves enough QA time to make sure that everything works correctly, because in previous leagues we had a lot of errors going on, and people felt like, sorry about the green screen here, people felt like they were testing the league for a good while before it really smoothed out. But yeah, I would suggest giving it a try. There's a lot more in-depth coverage by guys like Ziggity, for example, who go into a lot of good depth on what the mechanics are about, and so on and so forth. Changing gears for a little bit, I'm going to go into Diablo and talk about that. So looking at Diablo 4, I had a poll on Twitter that we'll just go to for a second. Basically I said BlizzCon line is coming in about a month. We know there's a new campfire scene coming from the update in the Diablo 4 quarterly update. Wow, repetitive. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, there was a quarterly Diablo 4 update at the end of 2020, and they said that we're getting a new version of the campfire scene. So I asked people to vote on what class we could be getting. This has been a thing going on for a very long time, but I just figured I'd throw that out there. The majority, half of everybody, says we're getting Amazon. I think that's a reasonable assumption, to be honest. A lot of people like their Necro at 30%. And then we have other who didn't say exactly what class they were hoping for. And we have a vote for Assassin. Yeah, I kind of hope it's Amazon or Assassin. We haven't seen those type of classes in a while. We're getting a Shapeshifter. And it kind of looks like they're going back to some of the old style classes, really picking on Diablo 2 at this point. And honestly, the new druid looks pretty badass anyway, so he just might be my main. Yeah, so with all that out of the way, time to get into the meaty subject of the episode. And that is Diablo 2 remastered rumors. So just to give you some background, these have been swirling for a very long time. There's been a ton of speculation, mostly around BlizzCons. There's been people who've posted tweets for various reasons, saying that I have a source and what have you, but I'm just going to focus on people who gave out information from more legitimate sources. So I have some stuff collected from IGN, for example, a couple of gaming publication people's tweets that are at least high level, and I'll explain a bit more about that and stop being so vague. So, where does this whole mess start? Basically, I'm going to pick 2017 as the kind of starting point for the more like official, shall we say, stuff. But there is some speculation that goes as far back as 2017 when in an interview, I believe it was from BlizzPlanet who was reporting this, asking a Blizzard person about Diablo 2 remaster, and they said no, it's not on their plate at the time, that they do want to bring games like Warcraft 3 and Diablo 2 to the modern Battle.net platforms. And that's sort of what sparked the more detailed rumors, I think, where people were like, well, this thing is on the old Battle.net, so, what's kind of in the works when they want to bring it to modern platforms, kind of, what does this mean? So, shoving that kind of under the rug, I would say, like I said, that's the most vague one where people just started chattering about it online, but things started to get a little more real after that. David Barwick had been interviewed countless times, I would say, where people asked him about Diablo 2 and what it would take to bring it to modern platforms, and he has told the story quite a few times of his time at Blizzard North and how they were backing up the game files regularly, and that the software they were using to keep a backup had been faulty and sometimes would just corrupt your entire repository, and that actually happened to Diablo 2's files. So that's one component of why it hasn't happened yet, because a lot of the stuff just doesn't exist, really. You would have to start making things from the ground up. And another point that David brings to the table is that the game is very much centered around the size of the screen that you had at the time. Everyone was on a 4x3 screen. It was very square, but they made the radius of awareness larger than that, so they could pull off things like mobs in the background or on the edges gearing up and then coming to engage you, and starting to notice you after a point, so it didn't seem like there was just some random stuff happening on the side where there's a mob just sort of gearing up doing nothing and then coming to get you, which is what you see when you get a lot of these high-res Diablo 2 mods, where they just zoom out the camera and do nothing else to change the radius of awareness, because they can't. It's a fixed kind of ring that they have programmed, and there's a lot of other deeper mechanics that are programmed into the frame rate of the game. So when you get into stuff like the cast rate or the attack speed, that's all centered around the fact that the game is 25 FPS. So all of that kind of culminates in the fact that they don't have a lot of the old stuff. They need to remake everything from the ground, and that's basically why it can't be remastered. You can't just take this game, put better graphics on it, and kind of hope for the best, because it's not feasible. And like I said, David talks a lot about that in his interviews over time. I'm just gonna get some water here. If you want some details on that sort of group of technical issues and more of David's perspective, you can look up, and I'll leave a link in the description, IGN Unfiltered number 28. The whole episode is about an hour and a half, but there is a clip of it that I'm going to link in the YouTube description as well, that just takes a few minute chunk about where he's asked specifically about this, and David just goes into the technical limitations, mainly around the screen size. So it's a good watch. If you have the time, I would say definitely go back and check out the full 90-minute episode. It's pretty good. That episode aired online in 2018, and that's basically what I'm going to use as my sort of kicking off point for the remastered rumors, because like I said, a lot of the stuff before that was just, I guess, a lot of people pulling too much out of statements from Blizzard and just trying to read too much into things. But I felt like this IGN interview was a really good way of getting an official opinion on things, rather than just having some audio of David, which I've listened to in the past, right? Or just, a group of people speculating without asking a source. So that interview doesn't necessarily confirm any Diablo 2 remastered things, but it does, like I said, ask those questions of what it would take, and you get to hear a lot of insight into everything around that. So, definitely Google it, give it a watch. Top-notch stuff. So getting into how everything culminated. Blizzard had a dedicated team called the Classic Games team, and they were working on a lot of the continued support titles. So that was inclusive of like Warcraft 3, Diablo 2, and we can see in the update history of D2 that there were a whole section of patches, especially the 114 block, which was basically resolving a lot of compatibility problems. It didn't really change the game in that patch sequence. It just made it functional on modern hardware. But I'm assuming that as time goes on, we'll actually see something that doesn't run in that 800 by 600 field of view, and brings it into the modern BattleNet platform. So where are we now? Just checking my notes. Okay. Yeah. So we have the IGN Unfiltered episode. So things started to break open a little more in 2020, I would say, when the editor-in-chief of Active Gaming, Julian Blairy, wrote an article that, as per a source, there would be a Diablo 2 Resurrected, he called it, and I'll just show you the article here. I have so many tabs open. Wow. Professional gamer. So I'll just copy past it. All right, here we go. So as per a source, you can translate this if you want in Chrome with auto translate, but basically there's a D2 remastered edition coming. They're calling it Diablo 2 Resurrected, and they're expecting it to finish in fourth quarter 2020, I believe, is the translation. And there's a studio called Vicarious Visions working on it. So a bit of background on them being Vicarious Visions. They're already a subsidiary of Activision Blizzard, but they had been working on mainly Activision titles only. So in more recent times, we've seen Tony Hawk's Pro Skater come out, which is an Activision remaster by Vicarious Visions. And at the time, I thought, okay, whatever. This company could be working on it, but they're not actually like within Blizzard. And I thought, okay, can't lend too much to that. But I would say things started to heat up a little more at the end of June 2020 when Mr. Blairy tweeted again, and I actually have that up this time, where he's talking about the anniversary of Diablo 2 and saying that, hey, today's the anniversary of Diablo 2. Basically, he's saying there's going to be again that edition release probably near the end of 2020. This post also covers Diablo Immortal, and you can listen to a proper translation of this by Riker, who graciously read through this series of tweets. But the two things it's majorly saying is there is a Diablo 2 Resurrected coming, and that'll be coming around the end of the year. And there's going to be a BlizzCon digital event around the end of 2020. So I can't say that's completely untrue. We are getting a digital BlizzCon event, but it is happening in February. That portion of the tweet talking about the game coming out at the end of 2020 is also still basically untrue at this point, but it could come out later. I believe his tweet does actually roughly translate to around the end of 2020, so does compensate for the events going on in the world and the real world delays that can impact a lot of dev teams, which it did. It did actually put a wrench in a lot of plans and delay things quite a bit. So we had the physical BlizzCon canceled. That turned into a digital event. So did Gamescom and basically everything else. So again, that was in June 2020, where Mr. Blairy comes out again and says, it's happening. Vicarious Visions, as he said in his May post, he's working on it. But I thought this started to get a lot more steam in the last couple of days, because Vicarious Visions was actually formally moved into Blizzard, and the Classic Games team as we know it has been quietly dismantled. So they're going to be completely focused on Blizzard stuff, and to me that confirms it in a way more than the previous events, because now it's like, okay, there was the article that said kind of in passing and kind of from a source, oh, they're working on a D2 remastered, it'll be called D2 Resurrected, and that's kind of all we know. It was just this kind of nebulous thing where all we had was, a source tells me, that type of thing. And, we're only starting to get a little more information on the happenings around that. And there was a great article by Jason Schreier of Bloomberg, who talks about the report, which was initially broken by GameIndustry.biz, who, like I said, reported that Vicarious Visions is now basically within Blizzard. They've been relocated, and he talks about why Team 1 was broken up. So without getting into the more detailed reasoning there, like I said, I'll leave the links on YouTube where you can go and check it out yourself. But very interesting times. Very, very interesting times. So with all that said, what do you think? Do you think we're actually going to get a Diablo 2 remaster? I think it's the most plausible it's been so far. I think that all of the things coming out recently... Oh, hey, it sounds interesting. Thank you. I think that with everything coming out recently, it's the most plausible it's ever been, especially because this was already a subsidiary of Activision, and now they're being put completely on Blizzard stuff. So going back to the IGN interview, in the clip that I'm going to link, David talks about, sure, okay, you're remastering it, so then if you change something, what else do you change? He's cited the stamina bar being just basically useless, right? So let's say you do take that out. So what else? Do you put in respecs? Currently, you can't do it very easily. You need to farm a lot of endgame events and then get an item called the Token of Absolution. But there's also mods that enable respecs on the fly. The most prominent one that I know anyway is called Pluggy. And that just sort of builds on that idea, right? You make one change, what sort of cascades from that? What else do you do? Do you expand the stash? Do you put in more modern features? Because, games from the early 2000s or late 90s are not the same as games today. There's a lot of modern conveniences that we really take for granted. Like, a small but significant one is picking up gold. In Diablo 2, you had to click on every piece. But in Diablo 3, these days, your little pet minion does it for you. Or if you just walk near it, it just gathers all of the gold for you. And it does the same with some of the resources in the game. So if you pick up a gem, it'll take all the gems in the area and just make your life a little bit easier. So, it kind of changes things a lot in that respect, and also because of the speedrunning scene, because of how highly impacted a lot of those old mechanics are based on the frame rate. So there are some old breakpoints, because I've speedrun Diablo 2 myself, that are heavily impacted by the fact that it is, like I said, 25 FPS. And, if I need my sorceress to cast faster, I know I need a certain amount to make it 1 frame faster. I need a certain amount to make it 2 frames faster, and so on. And that really kind of adds to the technicality of the run, right? It adds that challenge. And that's what makes it, both difficult and fun to kind of, tweak things in such a way. So, getting to chat for a second, of course, there are people who think Overwatch or Hearthstone are Blizzard games and ask for a Part 2 re-release and game remastered is just a huge gamble. Working on multiple... But, yeah, so that's just the nature of how a lot of companies work. So Overwatch 2 is going to do what Path of Exile is doing and just integrate the next game into the old one. It's always a gamble, but in my mind, you do have to move on at some point. With companies like them, there's always a lot of large-scale stuff. It just depends on what your workflow is to achieve that. So at, grinding gear games, for example, they have a pipeline where they're producing assets all the time, and they just have a theme to them. And when an expansion comes up, they can just say, oh, okay, we're taking these themed assets that are already made, and we can put them in here. And they're always on the project of updating the graphics incrementally, updating small things, including like the Vulkan beta, for example, changing the renderer so that it's more recent and not like 7 years old. The stuff in Path of Exile is not something you can see immediately, but given that it's all happening at once with like a Diablo 2 remaster, that's going to be pretty shocking, and it's definitely not going to work the same way. So if people want to speedrun it, for example, they're going to have to change their strategy. Like, you know, on a 60 FPS game, what are the breakpoints of teleport in that respect? Like, you know, do I need suddenly 50 FCR to, you know, take half the amount of frames from my teleport instead of, I can't remember the breakpoint offhand, but you get the idea, right? So instead of teleport being, you know, 12 frames on the old system, it would be 30, which is technically slower. And you would have to, you know, really push the limits of that on a 60 FPS game to get to the same sort of minutia and the same sort of speed that you would get. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, and also kind of what they do with the abilities, with the bosses, so on and so forth. So just so you know, if the bandwidth has dropped a bit during the show, I am recording a local copy as well, so I'm going to clean up the audio and upload that to YouTube, but I am going to leave the live version as well. Everything I talked about today is going to be in the description on YouTube, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. Basically, I hope it's true. There's a ton of information out there on this topic, and yeah, it'll be fun to see what develops. BlizzCon Online is happening in the middle endish of February, 19th and 20th, I believe. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said at the top of the show, we are getting a new campfire scene for Diablo 4, so it'll be interesting to see what class actually materializes from that. Yeah, so thank you for watching the show. We're at about 28 minutes, which I thought the show would be a little bit longer this week. But I guess that's just because of the amount of prep I had to do in order to get everything going. But like I said, I'll leave all the links in the description. You can check all this out yourself. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. And that's going to wrap up the show. But I'll get back to chat and catch up a little bit. Maybe 60 FPS make room for seamless breakpoints. Not necessarily. They were seamless before. Hold on. Sorceress. Breakpoints. So, give me 1 second here. So these depend on what skill and the frame rate, right? So if I go to FCR and I look at Sorceress, Lightning and Chain Lightning use a different set of frames than other spells. So if you're looking at Teleport, it's 0, 9, 20, 13, and 63, and it tells you how many frames that attack takes at each breakpoint. And basically you're saving 1. So it goes 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7 at 200. But the return starts to really tank right after about 63, I would say, or even 37, but mainly from here. Because you need so much more FCR to get the same 1 frame benefit that it just doesn't make sense unless you're in sort of a speed running context, I would say. Yeah, because saving that frame doesn't mean a whole lot in casual play. But, you know, like I said, once you change the context of what's going on and what that origin frame rate is, then you start really getting into the differences of, you know, instead of saving 1 frame, you're saving 10 frames, for example, on 1 breakpoint. And that's where the kind of big difference comes into play. The old D3 Planner website used to have a lot of info on breakpoints for things like necromancer attacks, and it had a good breakdown of everything that went on when you casted something and how attack speed affected it or cooldown, which to me are kind of not completely lazy, but the way they've been utilized in Diablo 3, I don't like waiting for my spells. I'd rather be limited by my resource. You know what I mean? Internal cooldowns are fine, like a recovery, you know, for in Diablo 2 they exist because you can't necessarily cast teleport again right away. There's a lot of barriers to making it go fast, right? So your hit recovery rate, and there is a small internal cooldown on stuff like Blizzard as well, which is much more prominent and longer, so you can't spam it. You know, you have to wait for it to come off, but the major limiter other than that is your mana. Anyhow, I am going to cut this video. I don't know if I'm streaming later. I mean, a frame is not a time unit. You could calculate well, yeah, I mean, so the frame is just in the context of whatever units per 1 second, right? It isn't a unit of time. It's just measured in the context of how much time has passed for that 1 frame to last on your screen. You know what I mean? So it's either 1/25th of a second or 1/60th of a second, which is a much smaller fraction. And that's why I'm saying the diminishing returns would be a lot more noticeable on the 60, but it would take a little bit longer to get there. So Diablo 3 uses a ton of diminishing return mechanics, especially with elemental damage. So if you get something with 20% elemental fire, and you get another piece of gear with 20% fire damage, it's not 40, it's something like 36. But if you get one thing with 40%, then the flat 40 applies. Anyway, that's a deeper discussion for a different time. I'm actually going to wrap up, cut this video, get it onto YouTube. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to support the stream, you can obviously follow on here, subscribe on YouTube, and have yourselves a good Sunday. Peace out. I may or may not be streaming later, possibly not, maybe later this week, but we'll see. And anyway, have a good weekend. Let me see if I can send you to somebody. Okay, who's on here? Let's go to Nightcat. Is he doing a Diablo API run? Oh, yeah. Okay, this is a great watch. So Nightcat is trying to get an API to run the original Diablo. So give him a shout, give him a follow, post why people happy, and we'll see you on the next one. Post why people happy, and we'll see you on the